If you want to start by asking everybody to sit down, that'd be great. Sit down. Okay, good. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. All right. Good afternoon. With the quorum present, the Maricopa Regional Continuum of Care Board meeting is now called to order. Please turn on your microphone when speaking and mute when not speaking. The MAG public comment process allows members of the public to comment on items on today's agenda or on items that fall under the COC's jurisdiction. If you would like to comment on today's meeting, please fill out a white request to speak card by the door and give it to MAG staff. If you parked in the garage, parking validators are available by the door. If you purchased a transit ticket to come to the meeting, please see staff for a ticket. And hearing assisted devices are available from MAG staff. Katie, can you please take roll call? Members of the board, we have some new faces. Please share that you are here, your organization, and how long you have been on the board after Katie calls your name.
Tish Brown Gambino. She's here. Jessica Cruz. Also not here. Liz DaCosta is not here. Lisa Glow.
Here, I don't remember how long I've been on the board.
Who are you with, Lisa?
I'm with Cass, but I think it's going in my second year.
Thank you. Chris Hallett.
Here, City of Peoria, I think in my third year.
Thank you. Michael Hughes.
Here.
He is here with a new leaf. Natalie Lewis.
Also here, and I think I'm getting more than my second year.
Jessica Raymond is not going to be here today. TJ Reed.
TJ Reed, Maricopa, 1 month.
Thank you. Charles Sullivan.
Charles Sullivan, ABC, and I think 5 years, 4 years.
Something like that. Cricket is not here yet. She is on her way. Danielle Wright.
Hi, Danielle Wright, Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence. Came on the board with Lisa, so I'm gonna go with 2 years.
Perfect. Co-chair Rachel Milne.
Here, Rachel Milne, City of Phoenix, and I am maybe at a year, maybe not quite a year. It's my second stint on the board. Altogether, probably a year.
Sure. Co-chair Vicki Phillips.
Vicki Phillips, Community Bridges, I would say going into second year. Yep.
And with that, we have a quorum.
Thanks, Katie. The next item on the agenda is the call to the audience. And this is the opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under the COC board that are not on the agenda or that are on the agenda for discussion and not for action. 15 minutes is provided today for the call to the audience agenda item unless the committee requests an exception to this limit. Katie, were there any comments received or anyone who wishes to offer comments at this time?
The first commenter is Michael Sim. Michael, if you want to come up to the mic, turn the mic on and provide your comment.
Hello, all. My name is Michael Sim. I am the executive director of the Logical Foundation. We are focused on cash transfers, unconditional basic income as a cost-effective means of reducing homelessness, as well as many other kind of positive impacts. I wanted to share with you all that we have an event on January 11th at an event called Venture Cafe. We're going to be screening a documentary called It's Basic in partnership with Mayors for a Guaranteed Income. January 11th, 4 p.m. It will start. It'll go till about 7 p.m. The event will. And the details of the event, I can share with you all after the fact, but it would be amazing if as many of you can come and also invite other members of your organizations, especially if you have connections with a mayor or work with a mayor, because Mayors for a Guaranteed Income will be in attendance. Secondly, I wanted to tell you all about some preliminary results from the largest basic income experiment regarding homeless individuals in the country. It's called the Denver Basic Income Project. They've been giving over 800 people in the city a basic income. It's a high quality randomized controlled trial. Many are receiving $12,000 over a year in some different ways. Some preliminary results are that no one who was receiving $1,000 per month and who was sleeping outside at the beginning of the program, none of them are still sleeping outside. The full-time employment increased despite the cash being unconditional and no strings attached. We actually believe that if strings had been attached, such as work requirements, fewer people, there would have been a reduction in work. And apart from that, there were fewer visits to the emergency room, fewer nights spent in jail, reduced feelings of distress and anxiety, and most importantly, I think, a greater sense of hope. That's what basic income really provides, the economic power to create one's own self-determination and positive future. So as we go along and as we ourselves launch our first program next year, the first basic income program in Arizona, as far as I know, true basic income program, it would be, I hope to have more conversations with y'all and share our results and have lots of great conversations so that we can end this problem with the first truly scalable approach.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Are there any other public comments, Katie?
Do have one other public comment from Jeff Caldwell. I will start the comment now. Maricopa County Association of Governments is an unelected body that is not a real government entity. Members of MAG are not elected, rather they are appointed. MAG needs to be abolished in its current form and should be a traditional nonprofit. Everything that you have done has led to an astronomical increase in homelessness and does not work. The results of the 2023 Maricopa County point-in-time homeless count are out. The Maricopa Association of Governments counted more than 9,600 Arizonans without permanent homes and found that homelessness increased by 7% over the past year in the county. That's more than a 70% increase since 2017. You have spent over $100 million to help solve homelessness, and it has done nothing. You would not exist if you were a traditional nonprofit trying to solve homelessness. Since you get government money, you are able to fail up. End comment. And that is all for call to the audience.
Thank you, Katie. We'll now move on to the next agenda item. Our next item for approval is the consent agenda. Items 3A through 3G are on the agenda for consent. Does any member of the board have any questions, comments, or would like to request a presentation of any of these items? Natalie.
Yes, Madam Chair, I would like to specifically talk to item 3E before we take action on the consent agenda. 3E is letting you all know that I need to step down from the board. I'm really sad to do so. I've enjoyed it. It's been just a year, a little over, and I've enjoyed every moment of it. And getting to know some new faces in this whole field. My husband and I have just decided it's time for our 2.0, and there are so many reasons behind that, and it's just something that's really important to the two of us. So given that, and given that I will actually be retiring in early January, I wanted to go ahead and step down from my position and go through the process to have my replacement come on board so we don't miss a beat. So on the January agenda, which is mentioned here, there will be an item. What we're doing today, I guess, is opening it up so that people can, in the East Valley, in the government East Valley position, can apply. I've already met with a group of East Valley managers and people that helped me identify a recommendation. And so we as a group have already identified Tim Burke, who is with the city of Tempe, and he is excited and will be applying. And Tim is, he's someone that he's been in Arizona and in Tempe in particular for a shorter period of time, but he was in Las Vegas before that. And he has a great number of years of local government experience, has a public administration master's degree, but also has a specialty in human services his entire time period. And even has experience working on the Continuum of Care Board in Las Vegas. So I know that he's going to be a rich participant and someone that's going to add a lot to this whole conversation. So I just wanted to let everybody know that's what item 3E is about.
Thank you, Natalie. And thank you so much for your service on this board. You brought a really unique perspective. We both are from large cities here in the community, but I think we both brought different perspectives and just really value your voice and how you pushed the board here in many ways, and also for your service on the ESG committee, which you and I served on for years together as well. Thank you so much.
You will be missed, Natalie. You will be missed. I've worked with you for a number of years and it's been an honor. And I just will echo everything that Rachel said about the unique perspective, the detail. And so we definitely will miss you and wish you nothing but the best in your endeavor. You're 2.0.
Thank you, Natalie.
Do we get to ask what the 2.0 is, or do we just have to wait for the LinkedIn update?
So the 2.0 is going to start off with, being part of the sandwich generation. And so my parents really need me. And Brad's dad, who is the final remaining live parent, is actually living with us part-time. So we are in that place of our kids still needing us, but also taking care of our parents. And so that's good. That's really important to me. I also just have a new grandbaby and I want to be very, present for him. So those two things in particular are going to help me continue to contribute, because that is what has been part of my purpose and what drives me in the work that we all do. And I feel that I can add to the quality of life for my parents as they go into their final, place. And I just, when I'm around my grandbaby, all I feel like is joy. And so it'll be that, but it'll be a lot of other things too that we've just put off for a long, long time. But those were the two things that sort of brought this decision to the forefront and made it something that we really needed to do.
Thanks, Natalie. Are there any other board members who wish to discuss? Go ahead, Daniel.
I have a question on item 3B in the data collection. What's happened with the previous data and what's being done with it? And is this an expansion of data that's being collected? Just have a question.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle, for that question. Previously, so this data sharing started during COVID. So it ended up, we had a 92% connection rate. I believe we brought that report to you all about a year and a half ago. I can't tell you the exact month, but we can definitely share it if interested. From there, we went to a heat definition. When we initially came through to share based off of heat and the vulnerability around heat, it was a really limited definition because of access's privacy concerns. So it was very similar to our COVID data sharing, where we were releasing data based off of somebody who is unsheltered, somebody who's staying in heat relief, so a really low barrier shelter, and then people who were severely mentally ill. Since then, Balance of State has gone through and created a data share that is a little bit more broad arching in the fact that it's everybody experiencing homelessness who is enrolled in Access. So broader, that's what we initially wanted to do, and Access said, wait, that's too much information. And now with the 1115 waiver coming down, they're wanting anybody who's experiencing homelessness to make sure that they're connected with their managed care organization, because they will be either enrolled as a general mental health individual or as somebody who is severely mentally ill. So this is sharing kind of those additional folks who are staying in shelter who have a general mental health diagnosis, and it'll be able to share data to Access, and who will then turn around and share it with their managed care organizations, saying like, this is where this person is staying. This is information about them, so that you can get in contact with them, because they're required to be in contact with them as part of being enrolled in Access. This will also allow for some data sharing back. That's one of the things that we asked is we had some aggregated data sharing back during COVID, but we've had limited aggregated data sharing back since. And so we're asking in this business associates agreement to have aggregate data getting shared back to the homeless system. So we understand how well is this working? How is this impacting the 1115 waiver? What can we be doing differently? Does this need to be improving?
Any other board comments on the consent agenda items? Does any member of the public wish to comment on any of the items on the consent agenda? All right, seeing none, can I have a motion to approve consent agenda items 3A through 3G? Thank you, Natalie. We have a motion from Natalie. Is there a second? And a second from Vicky. Is there any discussion of the motion from the board or comments from the public? We will now take a voice vote. All those in favor, please say yay.
Yay.
Those opposed, please say nay. All right, the motion passes unanimously. We will move to our next agenda item. Agenda item number 4 is the Shelter Bill of Rights from the last meeting. I will turn it over to Haley Owens, Human Services Planner with MAG and members of the Lived Experience Committee to provide a brief overview and answer any questions.
I am actually going to turn it over to Trevor Southwick. He is our chair for our Lived Experience Committee. And he is going to be presenting on what we discussed at the Lived Experience Committee 2 weeks ago. I don't know. Time is a construct for me. Thank you.
And were you going to be using that PowerPoint presentation that you sent to me?
I think Katie's pulling it up now. Katie, do you have the PowerPoint that I sent to you? Okay.
All right. The Shelter Bill of Rights. So the Shelter Bill of Rights was created to empower clients to know their rights when they stay at a shelter. It is also intended to create consistency among all shelters in Maricopa County. So a little bit of the history of the Shelter Bill of Rights. So the Maricopa Regional COC Board assigned the creation of the Shelter Bill of Rights to the Lived Experience Committee through the 2023 Strategic Plan. It was originally adopted from a variation with the Minnesota Shelter Bill of Rights. We sort of used that as a template and really adapted it and altered it to really meet the needs within our own community. And yeah, we began that in early 2023. So the process, so the Lived Experience Advisory Committee, no, sorry, Lived Experience Committee, I wear too many hats, began working on this in February 2023. We sought feedback throughout the process from various committees, including the Youth Action Committee, the Emergency Shelter Grant Committee, and a variety of funders and shelter providers, including Salvation Army and CAS. And the feedback that was received was incorporated throughout the process. This is most clearly evident by the language that states that shelters must have policies reflecting the various rights rather than having specific language. And to elaborate a little bit on that, we had what we thought was a beautiful version, and we brought it to the ESG committee, and they shut down quite a few bullet points on there and said, like, there's no way that we could require this from a funding standpoint. And so from there, we kind of created this idea that we have two versions. One that would be more layman's terms that would be given to the clients or provided to the clients directly with easy to understand, detailing their rights as a recipient of shelter services. And then we thought after the conversations with the ESG committee, we found that it would probably be best to create a separate version that would be provided to the funders, who then could include it in their future contracts with shelter providers. We felt that having two versions would be important so that the language that would be included in each would be more palatable and understanding for the clients versus for funders. To see board feedback, legality, enforceability. The Lived Experience Committee worked with other committees to ensure that the language in the Shelter Bill of Rights is consistent with in existing contracts and in the coordinated entry manuals. Clients always have the right to seek legal action if they believe that their rights are violated, regardless of this document. The Shelter Bill of Rights should pose no additional risk that shelters do not already incur. And this slide is in regards to some of the questions that I'm told were brought up at the last board meeting. Funding language change. This language should already be in contracts, so we do not anticipate the need to adopt new language moving forward. Monitoring. This language is already in existing contracts, so the typical monitoring process for shelters should be sufficient. And as far as grievances go, all shelters already have a grievance process. So if a client is dissatisfied with the grievance procedure at any particular shelter, or if they feel that they were to file a grievance, it could that it wouldn't go anywhere, or any of those types of concerns, MAG has the MAG COC has its own grievance procedure, and so they would be able to file a grievance through that process. And then with the Shelter Bill of Rights, there were questions around the name of that. And, the Lived Experience Committee, we felt that it's really important that the name remains the Shelter Bill of Rights, because it is important. It is an important document that is designed to empower clients to know and understand their rights. We really felt that the goal of this is to create additional opportunity for individuals to be made aware of what their rights are as a client receiving services. And so that we felt that was a fitting name. And do we have any additional questions?
Can we bring up the Bill of Rights or the Shelter Bill of Rights for review?
That's what I sent over to Jack.
Would it be possible to bring up the expanded? Thank you.
That's the one.
Excuse me, can I ask a process question? I don't know who this is for, but the questions that were sent over to Katie from the last meeting, have those all been addressed? And if so, how?
Those were all brought to Lived Experience. That's how some of these questions came about that were presented today. I think some of the questions were more posed as statements rather than questions that the Lived Experience took into consideration to address. And so all of them have been brought to Lived Experience. Nothing, they have decided to bring this back to you all. I'm speaking on behalf of Trevor. Do you want to talk about my understanding is Lived Experience did not feel like there was things that did need to be changed and are bringing this back to you with no changes as is, based off of after discussion as a committee and based off of the other feedback that was brought forward.
Correct. And Lisa, I have the minutes with each of the questions and the answers or responses. So if there was a particular question that was asked at the last time, I can maybe answer it if you remember what the question
I don't
was.
know. I just know Katie got questions sent to her, so I'm not really sure.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. Katie sent them over to me, and then I made sure that
We addressed each of
all too.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if there was a specific one you wanted an answer for, let me know and I can answer it. Yes.
One of the questions that we were asking was related to who had commented on this. And you've talked about other committees and the Lived Experience Committee, but more particular, some of the East Valley partners were curious if, what shelters have been involved in the conversation. Because at the time it felt like, you had really good representation from the Human Services campus, but maybe not so much from other shelters, but also from faith-based agencies that operate iHelp shelters as well.
Yeah, I will, well, I think I know, because it wasn't Haley at the time that would, oh. No, well, yeah, no, there were ones that happened prior to when Michelle was still there, I think. And so I do know when we were originally having conversations and they were reaching out to other shelter providers, I do believe East Valley Men's Center was on that list that were at least reached out to. I can't remember off the top of my head what their particular feedback was, but the general consensus was most people were like, we love this, we think this is a great idea. And they didn't have any like pushback or anything like that. And so I do believe they did, I think that some of the iHelp providers were reached out to, I believe.
The Shelter Bill of Rights was also taken to the emergency shelter work group. So every shelter did have the opportunity to weigh in on the feedback and sent out for feedback.
Okay. And then there was really good conversation at the last COC meeting. And my main concern at that point was the enforceability of this and just the misunderstanding that it could bring to people who are experiencing homelessness and what it really means to them from a legal rights perspective. I come from, a government perspective, and my fear is that something that's supposed to be so good, and it is, the words are good, they're very general. I heard from my colleague, Mike Hughes, that he could tell that these were guidelines, not requirements.
Yeah.
All of that made me feel better. But in local government, what happens is people bring pieces of paper like this to city council meetings and hold them up and say, you're not following my rights, and they misunderstand what that means, and then it creates all of these questions politically, and so something that is meant to be a tool to help humans know that they have the right to be respected becomes very politically driven, and now all of a sudden is something that we have to look at from an enforcement perspective. So I'm just thinking about it from that perspective because that's the world that we live in, and I worry about that. So I just feel the need to express that one last time before we take action on it today.
As an example, I look at that and I personally believe the whole concept is wonderful. I look at it though sometimes, and I don't mean it from a cynical point of view, but maybe the point, for instance, adequate space. It's my right to have adequate space. And I'm not so sure in our East Valley Men's Center, what the number of men we serve and how the best we're trying to provide that service, if people would 100% feel that they have adequate space. And so I don't mean that to get into what does that exactly mean, but it's more, boy, I as hard as we try to provide those services and give everything we can, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure there's adequate space.
Yeah.
So I just say that in a sense of I would hate to have that come back toward the agency as a violation. So maybe I'm splitting hairs. It's just,
we have the same issue. I mean, we have people on mats on the floor to accommodate when there's bad weather.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with that? And I don't see anything in the minutes reflecting the conversation that we wanted these to be guidelines, not requirements. I don't see that reflected in the minutes from the last meeting.
This is Haley Owens. I just want to encourage us to, I know sometimes it can get really easy to be caught up in specifics like adequate space. I think we tried to intentionally keep it vague, speaking on behalf of lived experience, because we know that each shelter is going to have their own needs. And so to say like everybody needs X amount of feet of space, this is the square footage, we know that's just not practical. Like you were saying, like in bad weather, inclement weather, that may look a little bit different than in a beautiful day or beautiful time of year. So I would just encourage us to not like lose the forest through the trees and get too caught up in things like this document has the ability to do a lot of really good things and just like make clients aware of what they should be receiving and what I know all of these providers, you know, are trying to give to all the clients. And we were really intentional about having this language be adapted from the current contract. So it's not anything that's too, that we felt was too much of a stretch. Like Trevor was saying, I feel like in the first versions, we were like really shooting for the stars. And then it was like, okay, well, let's bring it back down to earth a little bit. So I would just encourage everybody to sort of like, not to like overlook things, but just be wary of getting caught up too much in the semantics, because we don't want perfect to be the enemy of good.
And I accept that feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, and Haley, from our conversation in ESG, to one of the things that came out that I think was helpful framing for a lot of us is that the COC has worked on community best practices and performance standards and things, and those are reference guides to do better for our community and by our community. And I think our group kind of resonated with that for this, is that especially from the funder side, it was like, we're not asking you to rewrite contracts and to say you need to reference the Shelter Bill of Rights. It's more of using this so that our shelter providers can have a baseline of understanding, and then that our people who are staying in the shelters can also understand the basics of what that is, because they're not reviewing the ESG contracts for cleanliness of a facility or something, but they should know that generally speaking, it should be a clean area that they're going to be staying in, because that's what they deserve, right? So I appreciate you sharing with the ESG committee, and I think that clarified a lot for that group within that.
I think you just said something that I think would resonate. I agree with everything that's being brought up. Somebody reads that, it's a Bill of Rights. Vague is good until now it's in the eye of the beholder. Now, I don't think it's clean enough, safe enough, adequate enough. Bill of Rights, where do I take it? So, but shelter best practices may be a better terminology. I know you talked about the title. I understand the intent and everything behind it, but as part of a government that people like to walk up and make public comment about or who's enforcing, not to the enforcement of that, but on the complainant side, if they want to file a grievance that it's not safe, it's not clean, it's not adequate, what's that put on the shelter provider in order to be able to respond to that when it's a right? That just puts a nexus between the government and that shelter at some point.
And could I add just one other kind of comment that goes with what Chris is saying? In government, you know, we fight every single day to provide services and to provide more resources to our partners out there. And so the last thing that we need is for additional, you know, and people who with lived experience who are going to come forward. And from our council's perspective, they're going to look at them and say, wow, you have a lot of credibility. You've been there, you've seen this, you've done that. We've got to do something. And so now all of a sudden we, from a city government perspective, are auditing East Valley Men's Center, because they say, you know, it's dirty, they're mean to me, they bully us. And you know, and yet there's a huge perspective as to why they're doing what they're doing. So I understand, Haley, what you're trying to say, and I'm not trying to shut this thing down. That's not what I'm saying. I just feel the need to make sure that from the local government's perspective, you guys understand our shoes and what this could be and do and how it could backfire. And that's what we don't want to see happen.
So I want to circle back, because Natalie, everything that you just said is something you all currently have to do in contract, this aside. So I do think that is kind of, we get grievances all the time. We launched a grievance form. It was kind of as a request from both our lived experience and youth action committee. I get grievances all the time of I wasn't served properly or whatever that may be. I have to go investigate it, follow through, see if Lisa or Mike or Vicky or any other shelter provider did kind of what resources. I got one this weekend from LA County, had to reference them back to LA. So I hear what you all are saying. I really think this is something for lived experience to respond to, rather than MAG staff being put in the middle of this. Trevor, given that you are the co-chair, I think we heard pretty loud and clear that this is really, they would like the board to vote on this, but would like to hear from you as the co-chair. I think that's kind of where.
Yeah, absolutely. So for starters, I think that, like you said, Katie, that burden already exists for the funders and for government, because, anybody could go to any, government and complain about the services they received in a project, correct? And so what I'm having, I guess, what we as the Lived Experience Committee, we're having a hard time understanding is the concern or fear of extra burden to fall on the funders from like an accountability standpoint. Like, I guess what we would assume to be the people that have the most skin in the game and, fear of added layers of accountability or added requirements would be like the shelter providers themselves. Like, we felt that the biggest pushback that we would receive were for potentially specific shelter providers. But we feel that what is listed in the Shelter Bill of Rights, we feel are kind of basic minimum right, like human rights that recipients of shelter services should be receiving. So I guess, while we recognize that there are community best practices, we feel that having like rights and that level of accountability is critically important compared to just having best practices, because you can't, at least it seems less strong to make an argument that somebody's not meeting best practices in compared to like, these are basic human rights that we expect, and there's a level of accountability for that piece.
Sure.
Yeah.
And really quick, I'm going to go to Cricket, who's been waiting.
So I have a question. I'm sitting down here thinking, like, what can I say to like help bridge this? Because I see both sides of it. So I guess my question is, what change would have to be in place for the governmentally minded folks and the shelter providers? Like, what change would you want to see rather than just ask questions? Like, what do you want? When I was thinking about it, I understand about Bill of Rights, those words, but I also think that could be a little bit more confusing. But there's nothing in the document that I'm at all worried about. And I think this is such an opportunity for us to take a stance to say that, like, this is what we say. So we got to figure out how we're going to have the funding to make all this stuff happen. And if we have spaces where there's not adequate space, they should have more money over there at the East Valley Men's Shelter to, whatever that is. I know that it's like a long-term game, but I just want to know what would make it okay? Like, what needs to change for us to be able to pass this?
Natalie?
I think that for me, and I hear what you're saying, these are existing requirements. And in our world, that is through an administrative process. And so that makes absolute sense. And I guess what I'm trying to say, just to be ultra clear, is I just don't want to politicize an administrative process. Government has a lot of things that we have to do for checks and balances, and people complain that we're slow all the time. And it's because of this. And when you live in our world, we see it. And it's our job to anticipate these kinds of things. And so that, we're bringing forward things that make sense and that aren't going to add additional burdens or have unexpected or, consequences that we never said. And I want to say other thing, and that is that I absolutely agree that this is good and for our people with lived experience to really understand what their rights are. It's a lot like landlord tenants and tenants not always knowing their rights. And I think that's a really, really powerful thing that we need to do. But I think that, in that case, there is an organization that helps them understand those rights and helps to mediate issues, if you will, versus just having someone who might be feeling mistreated coming down to a city council meeting and there's no perspective around any of it. And so I guess to get to Cricket's question, for me, I just feel like there needs to be more clarity around how this information is going to be shared with the population and make sure they really understand what it is and what it is not.
Yeah.
And also that there be some role, and maybe it's through our lived experience committee, that when questions do come up or concerns come up, that there's at least some kind of mediation to help provide perspective and to work toward things at an administrative level and to keep it from escalating politically. And if we had a process like that to ensure people were well informed and that there's a process, I think that could be much better. In addition to some of the language like what Chris said with best practices or guidelines, but absent that, it would be process for me.
Trevor, can you talk a little bit about the rollout plan that Lived Experience came together on with the emails and talking with shelters? And you look very confused. Haley, can you
I'm like,
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So our plan is that we want this document to be posted in every shelter. So folks can see every day when they come into the shelter what they're entitled to. I know our staff has been doing a lot of tours of your wonderful facilities, and there's a lot of places where the grievances are pre-posted. So in my head, I'm like, oh, it'd make a lot of sense just like put the Bill of Rights right next to the grievance policy so people can just have it all in one space. And then for the shelter providers, we would be providing, of course, copies of this expanded Bill of Rights. So folks, if they wanted to see, okay, like here's our whatever number Bill of Rights, we want to see what that entails. So that would be accessible to them. And then of course to staff as well. So they can sort of see what goes into each of those bullet points. So we want it to be in every shelter. That was really important to Ellie, and that it would be visible, because we know through the intake process, everybody has some version of a handbook that they sign. But I don't know how many folks carry around that handbook or reference that handbook. So we wanted something that was like just really easily visual, like being able to see it, so it's not out of sight, out of mind. It's like, okay, now I know this is what I'm entitled to, and really help empower them. If they feel like they aren't being treated in a way that they should absolutely have every right to seek that being corrected, I guess. So yeah, and I don't know if I missed anything.
No, that's spot on. Yeah. And thinking about it, like you've commented on like your fear being like people, or what historically has happened is people showing up to like city council meetings and stuff. And like the first thought that came to my mind is like, if somebody's coming to a city council meeting and discussing how their shelter stay at a specific place was not met with these rights that are outlined in the Shelter Bill of Rights, to me, like that means that it's working, right? That means that people are aware, hey, I know my rights as a person receiving services, and now I'm aware. Now, obviously, city council meeting isn't probably the most appropriate place to go and air those concerns, but like, I look at this as an opportunity to ensure like really foundational, like informed consent, right? And so, when we talk about individuals being aware of like all the things when making a decision to receive services from a provider, like these are the types of services that to me seem like, fingers crossed, like they're already in it. Like these should be bare minimum expectations of the provider. And so ensuring that a shelter service recipient, or individual experiencing homelessness receiving services at a shelter, I think that it is absolutely makes sense to have these rights posted publicly, even during the intake process. I think also it should be a conversation about it. But I think that we've limited to the expectation in this rollout being that it's published or posted publicly, in an open space for clients to be able to see. But I really feel that the understanding that each individual has the right to all of this, to me seems like a top priority, significantly above the damage control, worst case scenario, this, creating public outcry. I feel like people being made aware of their rights far surpasses, additional administrative burden. Not that there can't be like a balance, but for me, for the lived experience committee, I believe that we feel that this should take precedence over worst case scenarios.
All right, we've got several other agenda items, so I'm going to ask two more questions. I think, Chris, you were going to ask a question, and then we're going to move on. First, I didn't hear anything in the implementation plan, Haley, on anything funders need to do. It sounds to me like this is all on the shelter side. Shelters are asked to post this. Shelters are asked to comply with this.
Correct. Yeah. We spoke with funders and we felt that this language is already in contracts. So if you want to attach this as an addendum, great.
Yeah.
If not, the language can already be found in the contracts.
Okay. And then second, when you brought this to the emergency shelter work group, did it go for a vote? Was it just discussion? What were their reactions?
It was discussion. No, it was just discussion. There's not a vote on it, but it did feed into the feedback that changed some of the language that was included.
Yeah, that would, yes.
Chris, did you have anything?
Yeah, it got back to something you said about level of accountability and even the question on what we would need. Can you scroll to the bottom? Because I'm just trying to, part of what we're thinking of, you keep saying like they have rights to these things based on what? If we adopt it, is that the policy that we give them that right for all these things? And if not, where is the accountability? You said this would establish a higher level of accountability than best practices.
So
all the way to the bottom, because isn't there one that you want it? I thought the one, is there one for is there one for about filing a complaint or anything? I thought there was one, clients have the right. Because we were also thinking maybe a disclaimer at the bottom that these are not legal rights like the Bill of Rights are. These are, I know what you're trying to get. And so we're trying to get there too. And I would flip it as what in here you must have that you feel is a basic human right versus we already have most of these covered contractually and everything else. So there is accountability already built in. I have no problem with anybody coming to any council meeting or even this meeting to sit. But if we pass this as a board, they're going to put us on notice that you set these Bill of Rights in passage. What are you going to do about it when they're not? And we don't have any direct connection to those shelters. So I'm just trying to see the disconnect, or I'm trying to show the disconnect on trying to see what is it you're trying to accomplish by getting these passed and by us passing them.
Well, I will start off and then Trevor, if you want to take over. I think it's, this is all stuff that they are already entitled to by being part of the shelter. So it's like, we don't post our contracts publicly for everybody to see. And I think for us, the important part of this was that, Dylan could walk into a shelter and he's going to see this on the wall and he will see it every single time he comes into the shelter. And the important part is like, he knows that these are all the things that I can expect during my shelter stay. And through the contracts, you guys are already asking your shelters to do this. So it's not anything that's like needs to be additionally enforced because ideally the contracts are already being enforced. And these are all things that are already happening. It's just making sure that clients know that they are empowered to that in the event that something falls through the cracks. And I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think I misspoke as far as verbiage when I say additional accountability. I guess how I envision this is just a more clear and concise and like consolidated level of accountability. When I like with the like attaching it as an addendum to like a contract and having all of those bullet points, I think really lines everything up together. So that way, if a grievance is made, somebody comes to MAG and makes a grievance. I wasn't getting adequate services, whatever, right? And so the MAG reaches out to the funder and MAG reaches out to the shelter provider to notify them of the grievance. Now the funder and the shelter provider have a copy of this grievance, and now they can revisit, hey, on our addendum with the Shelter Bill of Rights, these are the 4 points that this client, this individual is saying that those services were not met. And so I guess when I think accountability, I think a more clear cut from the funder to the shelter recipient with recognition that our COC doesn't directly fund shelter.
And then just to add on to that, Trevor, I think a word that I was hearing a lot in our lived experience community meeting was transparency, and just making this really transparent so people know exactly what they can and should expect.
All right, okay.
I was gonna say, you probably should add grievance in here. I mean, that's the basic connectivity part that they have the one thing they probably really have a right to is to grieve, file a grievance. And I remember we had the same conversation before, but it's not in there. And then again, back to the title, contractual obligations might work strongly. That just makes that connection on these shelter are under contracts and they're obligated to do the following. Again, versus rights. Rights is just I know it's semantics but I'm sure this is our lived experience when it comes to government.
Yeah, no.
All right. I am told we need to move on.
Not voting.
Is there anyone who would like to make a motion to vote on this item today? Hearing none, see.
Well,
You still have to make a motion.
Oh.
So you either need to table it, you have to approve it, or you need to.
Do I have anyone who would like to make a motion to approve, deny, or to table this item?
I'll make a motion to continue this conversation. And to do it in a way where the lived experience and the local jurisdiction committees are working together to come up with something that really makes sense for both, because I do believe that government wants to be transparent too.
Yeah.
And if there's problems, we want to know about it. But we just need to be really cautious about how we get there. And I think there's a way to get there and to do both. So my motion would be just to continue it until such time as the committees can work with each other and bring forward another option for board consideration.
I could second that.
Thank you. We will now take a voice vote to table this item and continue the discussion.
You missed it. We do have a public comment
Oh,
on this.
we have a public
Sorry.
comment. Sorry.
This is from Jeff Caldwell. These documents were created because homeless people are being treated differently at different shelter locations. No faith-based organizations were involved in the creation of these documents. There is no means of enforcement, and trauma-informed care is not included in the document. There is no point in this being created at this time. It would be better if organizations not serving people properly were not in service. End comment.
Thank you, Katie. We will now take a voice vote. Those in favor of tabling this item and continuing the conversation at a future meeting, possibly after local jurisdiction and lived experience have gotten together, please say yay.
Yay.
Those opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
Two. Were there two nays?
I did not hear voting for that part of it. Did you all vote? Great. Okay.
All right, the motion passes and we will move to our next item. Item number 5 is Nicole Newhouse, Executive Director of the Arizona Housing Coalition, will provide an overview of the work that the coalition does on local advocacy and ways to get involved in local issues when local issues arise. Nicole, welcome. Thank you for being here.
How are y'all doing today? I did not create a presentation. Katie asked me to. I feel like this is more of a conversation than a presentation. So just by way of some background, I'm 6 months into the new gig. I am not an encyclopedic, I do not have encyclopedic knowledge, but a couple of things I do know is particularly this legislative session, there's really no money. The budget does not afford any opportunity for much in the way of appropriations other than our continued push for state LIHTC. However, we do think that there is lots of opportunity for things to be happening at the local level. I don't know if all of you, and I can certainly make it available electronically, the coalition has published a handbook for Arizona cities, which really goes through a number of different things that can be done at the local level, because I think that that's where a lot of the real work in terms of creating housing stock, affordable housing stock is going to happen. So where we are at the coalition is we are looking at different strategies to deploy our staff working with LCEHs in order to create voices at the local level in order to be mindful of the unique situations of each city, because the city of Phoenix is certainly not at all like the city of Yuma. and making sure that we're having those conversations with people of the community, and then deploying talking points so that people feel comfortable sitting in front of one of these at a town council meeting. So it's not just the folks that are NIMBYs, it's people that are really activated in the communities that understand the need and the fact that these housing projects or changes to local policy can be advantageous to their communities. So I'm going to take a pause and see if anybody has questions. Or not.
This is Vicky. Just a quick question for you. So in terms of all of the things that you just highlighted, what is that education? Can you talk a little bit about the platform and the education in which that occurs? So if I, was, for example, launching a shelter and wanted to know how to deal with NIMBY, the NIMBY topic in my area, how would I find the information? Where would I go about that?
Well, that's a great question. And this is something that we're starting to do some capacity building inside at the coalition. But what we'd like to do is leverage our existing systems, because we have a system that should be able to do grassroots, where we're pushing out information, where a lot of the information is stored on our website, where we are doing a number of social media pushes. Socials are places where lots of people in the community live and breathe and get their news. So we need to create an entire strategy around socials, as well as grassroots and push and getting out there. And then grassroots from the standpoint of working and potentially even identifying people within communities that would keep an eye on agendas that would then let us know when we would need to deploy resources to that particular city or town.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you for coming and I think this would be great. I think that it's something that Mesa, as we went through our process, we didn't know about it. And it would be really helpful. Like you were saying, that at least, policymakers and others in the community are hearing from different perspectives and informed perspectives, and not NIMBY, because that is so strong. So I support this. I like this idea. And I think this body can help identify those things as we go along as well, and bring you to the table, or at least connect you to different jurisdictions or agencies that would need your help. Awesome. Thank you.
Natalie, what a great segue. This was part on the agenda because you requested it, but that is exactly part of this conversation. Is, you all know, the COC does not take legislative action. However, we do work hand in hand with Nicole and her team. And so if you do have items that are coming up or that you're struggling with, feel free to reach out to me or anybody on our staff, and we will happily connect you with Nicole, or reach out to Nicole directly.
And actually, I was thinking this before the situation in Mesa and Scottsdale came up, and then Vitalist came out with their FAQs, for which I was very grateful to Suzanne for stepping into the vacuum. But that's the space and place that we want to occupy, where we are supporting each of the cities and what's going on in each of the communities, and meeting them where they're at.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Nicole from the board or the members of the public? Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to our next agenda item. The next item on the agenda is the coordinated entry assessment tool change. Over the past several months, a stakeholder group has been meeting to develop a new tool to use the coordinated entry assessment process. Matt Kelly, coordinated entry co-chair, will provide an overview of the process and the new tool. Thank you, Matt.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the time. I will try to get through this so we can get to some questions towards the end. So next slide, if we can go into this. So basically, everybody is aware that in March of 2023, the coordinated entry evaluation was completed, which was essentially the beginning of a lot of different work. I know that Meg has been doing a lot of things behind the scenes and also publicly, but I think one of the biggest things the community was concerned with was we're looking at the prioritization tool in our community. So in April, we formed a committee, which is a work group, to develop the new assessment tool and kind of review our existing and options to move forward to possibly a new one. At that point in time, the committee kind of weighed whether or not we wanted to continue using the VI SPDAT or create a new tool. The community pretty overwhelmingly was interested in creating a new tool, so we went down that pathway. Primarily with the focus of reducing the subjectivity of the coordinated entry prioritization process. So with that, we were looking at what were the most critical local factors. And there's a couple of things on here. Chronic homelessness is basically, we all know that all of our funding is related to an individual being chronic, so that is always going to be there. But the community also decided that risk of remaining homelessness, health conditions, high utilization of system resources, ensuring equity, and then also because of the difference between the singles and the family community, we also added some questions related to family composition to account for some of their specific needs. So those are the 6 different areas. And we'll go through each of those as further with the individual questions and the weighting and the scoring of all of that. So in June, the work group created the first draft of the tool through a pretty collaborative discussion. We did obviously jam boards. Everybody loves the jam board. No. Live surveys, research, some interviews with other communities to kind of see what they were doing as we were kind of developing that. In July through October, we revised that and modeled that tool. So what that really means is we looked at this, we made some edits to that. In addition to that, Meg did do some evaluation of some data to make sure that the tools that we created were in line and not necessarily skewing our data, you know, just with some preliminary data. And if I believe I remember correctly, you looked at about 30 days of data. Is that correct, Katie? Thank you. So we did get approval from the work group and then also the coordinated entry committee. We were able to do that. December, we do plan on beginning the piloting of the tool, and that's going to be pending Solari completing the build out of the tool in the HMIS system. It's built out. Okay, that's great news. Thank you. So this is the tool. I first and foremost, we're going to go through the individual sections, so don't worry about having to read this really small type. That being said, you can kind of go ahead and just look at the overall point value. For families, the total point value is 330. For singles, it's going to be 220. And I think most importantly, looking at the data source. This is what's kind of interesting. So we're looking at either using UDEs, universal data elements, or some aspect of data related to from HMIS. There are 4, count them, total of 4 assessment questions that we're actually going to be asking. Those are subjective questions that we'll be asking individuals. So as we think of the number of questions in the VI SPDAT versus this assessment, it's a dramatic reduction in the overall questions that we're asking the individuals as they're coming into the intake process. Next page. Oh, by the way, it's also called the Maricopa Assessment and Prioritization Tool. Meg has already created an acronym. It's called the MAP tool. So just be aware. All right, so head of household meets HUD definition of chronically homeless, gets 100 points. And then the second section here, active on the BNL for 12 months or greater, or back and forth between the active and inactive more than 3 times in a 12-month period. Primary reason for homelessness is unsafe living environment or exploitation, and the number of unsuccessful attempts with housing from the homelessness system in the past 5 years, 10 points for a single one, 15 points for 2, and 25 points for 3 or more. Disabling condition. So these are all of the health risk factors here. Disabling condition, primary reason for homelessness is COVID, mental health, medical problems, or substance use. Disability types, lists a number of them there. And then also residence prior to entry was an institutional setting, hospital, long-term care facility, psychiatric hospital, and or substance use facility. And then one more question, were you able to access necessary medical treatment or therapy or access food appropriate for medically prescribed diet? That is a subjective question in our, I believe. The next one is utilization. Back, please. Sorry. I want to cover this one. Utilization of the homeless system. This is the top 5%. As of the most recent data that was pulled, it was 15 or more enrollments with the homeless response system in a 12-month period. And for families, it's 5 or more. Now, keep in mind that this is the top 5%. So this could go up or down depending on the system overall, because we are looking at the overall 5%, but this is our current numbers as they stand. Next page, please. All right. Have you or your kids, this is the family, we're starting to get in. Okay, this is actually the race equity piece. I apologize. Have you or your kids ever been in foster care, or do you have an open Department of Child's DCS case in the past 6 months? Have you ever in your life spent any amount of time in the juvenile or adult correctional facility, jail, prison, or detention center? And last but not least, have you faced discrimination in your attempts to obtain housing based upon a protected class? And then we went ahead and defined those protected classes as race, religion, national origin, color, familial status, sex, or disability. These are obviously the race equity questions. And the first two are really more or less proxy questions for individuals. And obviously the third one is a little bit more direct. And then last but not least is the familial section. And this is directly from UMOM providing some significant feedback with regards to what they felt as far as when they started to score people and they looked at families, they were not hitting a lot of the numbers that were represented in the top section. So we added this section for families specifically to help with kind of ferreting out the families that were most in need. So family residence prior to entry was place not meant for human habitation, but no current family shelter provider. Family with children under 6 years old or pregnant, family with children over 6 years old, single adult with 3+ children under the age of 18, 2+ adults with 4+ children under the age of 18. And obviously you can see the different scoring there for that. So this is the tool that we have. And I think I want to really, really stress that right now, what we are doing is a pilot. We're not necessarily rolling this out. This is not something that we're going to say we're going live within our community and using this to prioritize and issue referrals for rapid and or permanent supportive housing. This is for us to get some data and understand how this is testing with our community and seeing where we're at before we decide, yay, we're going to pull the trigger and kind of roll this out into our broader community. So the coordinated entry has already, approved this. Obviously, we're here for the COC board approval of the pilot of the map pool. And then we will now do if it's approved, we will be doing a pilot over the next 6 months. And that is really the plan here. And I think it's important to acknowledge that this pilot period is an opportunity for us to review the data on an ongoing basis and potentially make some changes if necessary during this time frame, and or at the time of the end of the 6 months, we can make some final recommendations on adjustments and or changes before we go ahead and roll out and hopefully go live at that end of that 6-month period. Any questions? That was a lot. I'm sorry.
TJ, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
TJ first, then Vicky.
We'll all go ahead at the same time. A few questions. One, I am curious if y'all have talked about or looked at in either the disability section or I think it'd be in the health section of just its impact on ability to work and how that would impact then what type of referral would be made on the back end potentially. And so if there is any reference to that, and I don't know if I have can I list off a few and then you go afterwards? So that would be one.
Yeah.
The next is the way that I'm reading this, and you can just correct me if I'm wrong, is the VI SPDAT tool had 27 questions or so that were additional to what was already asked. Right now, you're using UDE and data that's already existing except for 4 questions, right? So can you maybe answer what are we losing with this that we are getting now? Obviously, everybody had issue with the old tool, but there were questions that were framed, I think, more my specific concern is around disability types. The way that's framed in HMIS is do you have a disability? And if you say substance use, you can add that. Whereas in the VI SPDAT and other tools, it was framed more do you use substances? Which I feel I don't know if you guys looked at that, but are we going to get a lot less people self-sharing that they use substances because it's framed as a disability versus it just being have you used substances in the last few months or whatever? And then the last question, I was just confused on the high utilization one. Is that like separate enrollments, or would one time, so if somebody was in the system for a year, would that count as 15 plus? Or is it like 15 separate enrollments with different agencies across the last 12 months? So those would be the three.
So I'm going to go back to the first question, which is about the employment. So that really kind of speaks to some of the prioritization, I think, as it relates to referrals as we move forward. And so there is a separate conversation happening about how we're going to be issuing referrals moving forward with this. So looking at that, and there was some discussion around prioritization about what we're going to be doing to evaluate if an individual has employment history, does that change the type of referral that they would be getting? So I think that becomes kind of like the next phase of this process. So I think it's definitely part of the conversation, but we kind of partition prioritization as far as like whether we're going to be doing, you know, a set score, those people at and above get PSH, and a set score and below get R rapid, or if we're going to say, hey, we have 5 rapid and we have 15 PSH, and we're going to decide from the top of the list which ones are the best fit for which. So there's been some discussion around that. There was 2 listening sessions and 2 feedback sessions that were had. I don't know the full response of all of that. I was in both of them, but I haven't seen the summary of those to kind of figure out. The vibe I got from this was that they wanted to go top down and kind of establish some standards for how to best prioritize the available resources and look at individuals. I think employment will be an absolute factor with regards to that, probably amongst a couple of other things. Number 2, this is a really hard, I don't know the answer to your question, so I don't know whether or not substance abuse is going to be underreported or overreported. But what I do know is that the VI Sped Ed is a completely subjective document, and we're now using data to some extent, which is still some reported, but I think that there's probably going to be some shift in that, but I don't know. And maybe Katie, you had looked at some of that, have you?
Yeah, I think that's going to be something we continue to evaluate with data. So that's exactly the part of this, like, this is a pilot that we are looking for you all to approve. So we're going to continue to look at data on every single one of these questions. Do we have an overrepresentation, underrepresentation based off of the data that we know? And so, and I think kind of, I guess, maybe jumping to an answer to your question, it was also underreported on the VI SPDAT, and we weren't consistently looking at it. It became a score that we referred off of, not, hey, we're going to get you substance use services because you answered yes to
Correct.
this. So I do think we are trying to move away from just asking questions to ask questions. So there will be less assessment questions here, but continue to evaluate whether or not we get accurate reflection is kind of exactly what the next 4 months hold.
Yeah, well, and that's all I would mention that for, is not to like make any substantive changes, but that it's like this part of the UD is self-reported as well. It's just framed a lot more clinically. And so I'd be curious as to, like, as you test over the next 6 months, if that is underreported, because even though it wasn't looked at individually, it did impact acuity scores, which does impact where somebody is at in prioritization.
Hey, real quick, a thought on that. Brian with MAG as well. So I worked with Matt some on this tool. I think generally you're going to see this come up in other contexts as well.
Yep.
The fact that it's in HMIS means that somebody asked the question of a client. And so, but I think we're hoping and expecting, and what we've seen in other tools that have been rolled out, is that you ask that question over time, right? With a case manager that's working with the same person, building trust. So, if you're an outreach worker that knows somebody intimately over time, you're more likely to get a solid answer than if you just sort of pop off a question. And I think we're banking on that.
Enrollments, 15. So I believe, again, help me on this, Katie, because I believe we evaluated and there were certain enrollments that we'll consider as one, and there'll be multiple that will, like, so for example, if you were to check into multiple places, there would be multiple enrollments. So it would be a little bit dependent. Go ahead.
Yeah, it is considered on enrollments within the system. So even if you're staying at a shelter for 365 days, that'll be one enrollment. This will be something that we continue to evaluate over time, but we have many people that have significantly more than 15 enrollments. They're hitting a bunch of different systems.
Yeah.
We're now looking at that. This data point came from the Arizona Housing Analytics Collaborative. We're continuing to work with them to say, like, is this truly the highest utilizers? Are these the highest cost folks too? So that we can start to identify we're trying to find the people who are consistently interacting in the system. And if we move them into housing, there will be less interactions with the system. So this is kind of a data point that that's part of the reason Matt identified that top 5% is because if that definition needs to change, it is really kind of this is how it's being defined as this top utilization.
All right, thank you. And thanks for your guys' work on this. This is awesome.
Thank you.
All right, Vicky and then Chris.
Yeah, just a general question, Matt. Can you talk at all, if we're even there yet, on the strategy to pilot this? Are you going to incorporate outreach teams? Are you going to do 3 months here? You know, have you gotten that far along in what the strategy is during the pilot phase?
So I think I don't know fully, but like my understanding is that I think we were planning on rolling it out with the lead agencies was the primary way that we were going to do it because just the numbers make the most sense.
Is it only people going to those lead agencies? Is it outreach teams? What, where the dearth of the people that you're going to be?
Yeah, so we're working with the coordinating entry leads to develop out the script and the training that is going on with that. We'll have more information later this week on kind of rollout of the assessment. We can't roll it out till you all approve it. So need an approval first before we can finalize that, but we're meeting with them on Wednesday to finalize.
Yeah. And I think, again, I want to stress like the questions that we've asked, like there's already been some initial feedback. We might be coming back for some modifications to those questions and things like that, just because we want to make sure that when we're presenting or asking these questions, they actually make sense to the individuals we're presenting them to. So I think there's going to be some tweaking there, just to be fair.
Chris?
Yeah, I just want to clarify, this is a duplicative tool during the pilot. They're going to be doing both assessments.
Correct.
So we can cross compare.
Yes, absolutely.
Do any other board members have any questions or comments?
I guess one other thing is at the end of the 6-month pilot. So then it sounded like you were saying throughout there will be adjustments potentially being made to the tool and process and then whatnot. And then will that also afterwards, like the final stuff, come to the board for the board to approve that?
It's
as
my
well, or-
well, so it's my intention to bring it back to the board and say, hey, like these are the adjustments we look to be making. This is the final tool we want to approve. This is what we learned. This is the data that we analyzed. This is why we're making these recommendations. So
I'll even second that. Anytime there's a modification, you all have to approve it. You are the operating board. So
yes.
Even if questions changing, all of those have to come to you all for approval.
I think the goal is to be as transparent as possible, I think is really the goal here, because this is a big change for our system.
So we will be seeing this item on future agendas and then definitely in 6 months after the pilot.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Good.
I want to thank everybody. So there were 15 people who were on this work group who met twice a week for 5.5 months. Twice a month. I'm sorry. That's a lot of time anyway. So twice a month for 5.5 months, just for the record. And so we did have representation across a number of committees and then also different, populations within our community. So this is a big lift for a lot of people. So I just want to say thank you to that because that's a lot of time.
Yes, big thank you to the work group for sure. And thank you, Matt, for leading the group.
Thank you.
Can I have a motion to approve the pilot phase of the coordinated entry assessment tool?
This is Vicky. I'd like to motion to approve the pilot phase of the new coordinated entry assessment tool.
Thank you, Vicky.
Get all that?
This is
Thank you.
Cricket. I think somebody in the audience raised their hand. I don't know if we do that now or later, or do we not at all?
Okay, we do it right after this.
Okay.
So we have a motion from Vicky and a second from TJ. Is there discussion of the motion from the board or comments from the public? Amy, do you want to come up?
I can bring you on.
Amy Schwaben, under Human Services Campus. Yes, Matt, others involved spent a lot of time in these conversations. The HSC team is represented. I appreciate the expediency they're now creating around making change. A couple of questions that HSC has had along the way that are not fully answered that I think are important for the board to note is one, we've requested a legal review, particularly of the race proxy questions. At the end of the day, UMOM and HSC have contracts with HUD for coordinated entry, and I think our organizations are the most liable. Should clients feel like those questions are not asked fairly, that staff haven't been trained on how to define discrimination when a question asks, have you ever faced discrimination? UDEs are all self-reported data. So again, I don't know where the date, like, I'm all for data. I think we need to look at the fact there's an assessment tool and there's prioritization, and this work is murky. And I think the slides that Matt showed today demonstrate a combination of assessment in today's prioritization versus the evaluation said the tool currently used in the Maricopa Regional Continuum of Care is not equitable for race and ethnicity. And that the charge was to look at the assessment tool and create or improve, replace some tool that would improve upon inequity based on race, ethnicity. HSC has continued to share that adding 10 points or having 10 points related to race and race proxy questions doesn't seem to be the prioritization out of the entire evaluation. We haven't stood in the way of any of the work group activities. I'm not here today to ask you to not approve piloting the tool. I would like everyone to keep in mind those factors from the original evaluation and where we are as a community, that we need to improve the equity based on race, ethnicity. And we will need to adapt prioritization on a much more frequent basis than adapting the assessment part of the tool. I have notes. Maybe those were everything. I think that was everything I wanted to say. Again, appreciate all the hard work, want expediency to create greater equity. HSC is not confident that this version of the pilot tool is what's going to create equity in how people get placed into housing. And I would ask that HSC and UMOM have some greater representation and voice in this conversation, as we are the two organizations that hold the contracts with HUD. And at the end of the day, implementation will be reflected upon our organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Matt or Katie, do you have anything you want to add based on public comment?
I have two other public comments. Comment one from Jeff Caldwell. Stop making homeless assessments that base entry on race. End comment. Second comment is from Cindy Cragen on the coordinated entry new assessment tool. Items 36 through 39 on this new tool is racist. It restricts the workforce based on the color of people's skin. If there are more people who are the most qualified apply to a specific organization or entity than the reflection of the homeless population's skin color landscape, the organization or entity is prevented from hiring the most qualified people or work to change the workforce's racial makeup. The Supreme Court recently ruled this type of scheme in government is unconstitutional. End comment.
Thank you, Matt.
Okay, can I go back to Amy's comments? Thank you. So I think what's important to acknowledge, and I hear what you're saying, Amy, with regards to the race equity piece. And I think one of the things that we're going to be evaluating is the race equity as we move through this. It's not just going to be an evaluation of the data, but we are going to be looking at race equity and how that breaks down and how we're evaluating and prioritizing individuals. So that is going to be a part of the discussion. So if we see, I think, an underrepresentation or a skew within the data as it relates to our community, then I think we're going to be making some adjustments accordingly. And that's, I think, part of this pilot. So I want to acknowledge that it's not a permanent document. And I think those questions, I 100% agree. We need to evaluate those and make sure that we're doing it and asking those questions in the correct way for the individual so that we're getting, appropriate responses from individuals and that they make sense to the individuals. So yes, I don't know if that helps or speaks to some of your concerns. There we go. Okay, thank you.
Amy, I'd also like to add, we did go through legal review and happy to touch base on the feedback that we got from multiple legal teams, including HUD's Office of Fair Housing.
All right, we will now take a voice vote. All those in favor of approving the pilot phase of the coordinated entry assessment tool, please say yay.
Yay.
Yay. Those opposed, please say nay.
Nay.
The motion passes. Thank you to the stakeholder work group, coordinated entry committee, and all of the folks involved. It's a tremendous amount of work and we really appreciate everything that went into it. All right, agenda item number 7, as part of the Pathways Home and in alignment with our community needs, the 3 COCs have been working with the ICF team to complete an evaluation of the data used in the community and of the HMIS vendor. Chris Pitcher with ICF will provide an overview of his findings and recommendations. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, and glad to be here. It's nice and chilly here in Denver, so I'm a little jealous of you all down there. We are talking about this for the second time. So about a month ago, we did draft recommendations. These are the final recommendations, which hopefully I sent to Katie and Cleo on Friday, that you have seen the final document. We did change a little bit of our approach, so I'm going to talk through that, but I know you have a tight agenda, so I'm going to go rather quickly. Cleo, next slide, please. We'll talk a little bit about the background process, the recommendations, and then we'll just do 2 items from the call to action in the actual document. Next slide. So on the background and process, next slide, we were under contract to conduct a comprehensive review of the technology used within the homeless service response system in all 3 COCs across the state, and to provide you recommendations with improving your data management processes. We did use an approach that was mixed. We had analysis of your HMIS systems, your other data systems around it. We did some surveys and qualitative information, as well as one-on-one interviews and focus groups. And the recommendations were to provide immediate next steps that you all can take based on what we saw and based on the best practices we see with data in the homeless response system. Next slide. So we entered into a contract with Solari, funded through the Garcia Family Foundation. I believe that was October of last year. Interviewed the HMIS leads and got into each HMIS implementation. Reviewed a lot of non-HMIS implementation data sources, because your HMIS doesn't do everything you need it to do. You have a lot of stuff wrapped around it, which took us a while to go through. We did a survey to get information, and then did a facilitated focus groups and interviews, many of which you probably were part of through this process for the last several months. Next slide. So we did focus on all 3 HMIS implementations, mostly how they were configured, things like how the functionality works for merging clients. Is it compliant with HUD? And the answer is yes, your HMIS meets HUD compliance most of the time. There are always circumstances where it might not, but for the most part, it is HUD compliant. We also looked at non-HMIS data sources, including all the things you use for coordinated entry. I know that was the last topic you have, and all the other things that we do. And that was really a source that led us to some of our recommendations, because all the data that you're using outside of HMIS is also more risky to you as a continuum, because there's more chance of disclosure that is not authorized. We did 10 focus groups across all 3 COCs and 34 interviews. We were going to do about 20. They just kept going and going. We wanted to talk to more people to get really fine-tune our understanding and knowledge of what's happening in Arizona. And ultimately, we also did a survey. We got 123 survey responses. It didn't lead to a lot of knowledge. Honestly, the interviews and focus groups led us to the most amount of knowledge that we came across. Next slide. So recommendations. What did we see? What can I tell you? So the very first thing that we noticed as a problem is your HMIS doesn't do everything you need it to do, and you're doing a lot of stuff. And someone said, and I don't know who this was, we had so many interviews we forgot, does there need to be so many data systems? And the answer is no, there does not need to be so many. We have so many. We noticed that most agencies, if not all, have their own internal data systems. Some might have to use electronic health record systems. Some are dealing with access. We got HMIS. Our data ultimately is ending up in the Dwell, the data warehouse system. And all this stuff is not talking, not working. It's all just doing its thing. So in our draft recommendations, we did a review of another data system that is less expensive and has the things you need. In the final recommendations, we actually just want to tell you, we need you to think about an HMIS or a data system solution that does what HMIS does, plus all the other things you need to do. So one of the things that we're recommending is an application program interface or an API technology that reduces the duplication of entry. One of the things that could be done here is an agency could have its own internal data system, verified that it is up to HUD standards, and instead of entering data in that and an HMIS, you enter it in that data system and it goes to HMIS. We were using an analogy for folks who know social media. This is kind of like when you put something on Instagram and it says, do you want to put this on Facebook? And it automatically goes there without you having to do the same thing over again. That is ultimately what we're saying you could really benefit from. We also noted that you're all three COCs are going through the same thing with coordinated entry. I hear you going through it. It was the last agenda item. Thinking about how your technology can support coordinated entry instead of how your coordinated entry process has to get stuck into HMIS. That's something we'd like to see kind of fixed through this process. And ultimately, we're going to ask you to think about RFPing for a new HMIS software solution that does these new things that your current one does not. So our first recommendation is around architecture. I have a few more slides on this that hopefully will explain what we're talking about. So we'll go to the next slide. So we did a word cloud of all the data systems you threw at us in meetings and focus groups, and we just wanted to show you what we're talking about. There are just so many things you're using that have overlap. It's not a lot of overlap in all systems. It is overlap in a lot of systems. So we just wanted to show you most agencies have a lot of different data things happening, and those things are not coordinated. So this is just to show that. The next slide should do the same. And I'll talk about it just a little differently. So when I think about where your data is throughout the system itself, we have agency level data systems. And the one thing we heard from agencies that participated in this conversation is they are not willing to think about giving up their data system. They have made it work for all these different purposes within their agency, and they just aren't willing to. They also might have the need for electronic health record systems, or maybe case management data systems, or grant management data systems. So there's a lot of stuff sitting at the agency. At the same time, and this is just an example in the document, the final document, this isn't just focused on Pima County. We just needed to use one. So in this one, it's just have to be Pima County, but let's just call this Maricopa County HMIS. You have an HMIS that you are using, you're entering data into, and you have a bunch of dashboards that you have to create to do the processes outside of HMIS that you would rather do within that secure environment. Those could include a by name list, other data systems maybe that we're using for initiatives. Those are all being wrapped around an HMIS that can't do all those things internally, so we're bandaging it up. And then a lot of you are working with a closed loop referral system, and now we have this new thing called Dwell, the data warehouse that's operational in the state, that is also duplicative, but we have all these things. Think of them as silos right now. So what we're really thinking about as far as architecture, next slide, please, is a flexible data system configuration that would allow all three COCs to work together in one environment. So I'm going to try to explain this. We have changed this particular thing about 5 times, so I'm going to do my best with it. So in the middle, we have HMIS. Consider that whatever you want. As we say, as the recommendations say, we think you should RFP for an HMIS that meets all of your needs. You in Arizona aren't just looking for HUD compliance. You're looking for all the other stuff too. That's what was really we heard. So think of the HMIS as just a box right now. What that box really needs to be able to do is talk to agency level data systems. This will change what your HMIS lead does as far as activity, but it has that API. You enter your data into your HMIS, into your agency level data system, let's call that Facebook, and you hit a button and it goes straight up to HMIS, let's call that Instagram. So all of those arrows are data systems, are conversations. We also, in our draft recommendations, found that there are agencies that have data systems that wouldn't meet the requirements for an API, so they would need to enter data directly into the HMIS itself. Having this dual functionality is not that uncommon these days. Off to the other side, we have ASHAC as well, the Arizona Housing Analysis Collaborative. We're putting that up there because we have not found that type of support in many other states, and it's just a really cool thing to have, and having them have access to HMIS is really important. And then you see over HMIS as Dwell. All this data that goes into HMIS, whether it comes from agencies, whether we're entering it directly, needs to be available in the data warehouse, which is ultimately where ASHAC and other folks are going to do the data analysis across the state. So this is a big change. This is something that we had talked about 15 years ago, and we weren't ready for it. But now the technology is there and strong enough that we can think about having a data system that all three COCs can work together. And I think that really became the theme of this entire thing is we have really talented HMIS leads and staffs in all 3 COCs, and they're doing the same thing over and over again and duplicative instead of working together. And that leads us into our second recommendation. Cleo, please. Governance. So if we decide to go with a single HMIS for all 3 COCs, we're going to have to figure out how to govern it. For my purpose and for what I found, the way in which our data warehouse Dwell came together, all 3 COCs are part of that. They're working together. They come up with governance, and I was shocked. So I was part of the team that helped get the initial funding for the data warehouse. I went away for a pandemic. I come back and you have a data warehouse. I have worked on data warehouses that take decades. You all did it in the span of a pandemic and did it very well. And I was very impressed with how that group of folks were making decisions together on behalf of all 3 COCs. So we believe that a shared governance model can work here. It works in my state in Colorado. We have 4 COCs, 1 HMIS, and they all work together within that environment to do the things they need to do. And they don't give up their autonomy. There are things you can still do within these environments to still make it Maricopa, to still make it balanced, to still make it Pima. So developing that clear leadership and decision-making structure will really support that new structure of the data system and hopefully find some efficiencies. So finding efficiencies at the agency level, not having to enter data, finding efficiencies at the HMIS governance level, so we're not making similar decisions over and over again and working in those silos. So that is our second recommendation. We'll move to the third. System integration. So you're doing this. It is just kind of taking it to the next level. And that is leveraging the success of Dwell, whether that be in the governance and or the structure of Dwell itself and the way in which Dwell aggregates data. Also, we're going to, in the document, we talk about increasing collaboration across other sectors and using data within the state to kind of make decisions that we're not doing now. And strategizing around how to bring a large vision data system into operation that supports the homeless response system. When we originally 20 years ago selected our HMIS, it was to meet a requirement by HUD. We're not doing that anymore. We've met the requirement for HUD. All 3 COCs can do that. Now we need to make it work for the people experiencing homelessness, which is what really isn't happening. So system integration, we're talking about leveraging more data systems than we have, but not entering data into them, having them talk and work together. Next slide. All right. What else do we need to do as far as having full data? We know that HMIS alone does not tell the story of homelessness. Everyone in this room knows that. Everyone in this industry knows that. So we are in this particular one talking about how do we do data better. So there are several places that we think that we need to do a little bit better. The first is truly understanding what's happening in domestic violence. Because of the Violence Against Women Act, they cannot use HMIS, but we're also leaving that piece of the experience of homelessness out of the overall planning. So we have some ideas and recommendations for starting that conversation. This is a big one, not necessarily in Maricopa, but definitely in Balanced State, developing meaningful relationships with tribal nations. That is something HUD is very interested in. They have several documents created on engaging with tribal nations. Tribal nations are now eligible to be COC recipients. So we think going in that route is also going to give you a better picture of what's happening in homelessness. And last but not least is really understanding and innovating around street outreach and unsheltered data collection. HUD in the fiscal year 26 HMIS data standards will be focusing on a better way to collect street outreach data and unsheltered data, but we don't need to wait for HUD on this particular one. Tucson is doing some things around street outreach. Maricopa is as well. We have 3 grantees that have received unsheltered funds through the Unsheltered Special NOFO or SNOFO. The recommendation is let's figure out a better way to make sure we are taking care of our unsheltered neighbors or unhoused neighbors and collecting that information better. Collecting contacts isn't giving us what we need. We need to know where those folks are, what they need, how we can help house them. So that is another piece of our recommendations. Next slide, please. Data analytics. As I said, we were very pleased to come across the Arizona Housing Analytics Collaborative, also known as ASHAC. All 3 Arizona universities working together in one place. They have funding through the Garcia Family Foundation for quite some time, which is wonderful. They are losing their home, though. Currently, they are on an Arizona State data lake that is no longer funded. So bringing them into the data warehouse environment, Dwell, could be a very good thing. But definitely using ASHAC to do the knowledge. I said this when we were there on site, that a lot of times we're asking folks to do data analytics who don't know how to do data analytics. As someone who used to run an HMIS, if you told me to do data analytics, I would do it, but it's not my skill set. I'm about managing the data system and that. So because we have this ASHAC asset, we want to leverage it and maximize it as much as it's humanly possible. Next slide. And data literacy, this is something that is all over the place. Folks said they absolutely know what the data does. 10 don't know what the data does. 0. Ultimately, you have assets that you just need to leverage a little bit better, like the learning management system that you have, and prioritizing data literacy. There's one thing that's not going to change, and that is that this industry is going to have a lot of churn. I have been working with your COC for about 15 years, and I have seen a lot of people sitting in that room right there, that chaparral room, I think it is, and it turns over, and it's just part of it. But having something that folks can rely on is good. We also know there's a lot of other folks nationally and within the state doing learning management system content development. Sharing that information and working together will really help you as folks come in and out of your service system, and really increasing that data literacy across the board. Next slide. All right, so I'm doing this fast because I know you have a very quick thing, and this is the second time we're talking, so I'm just going to highlight 2 call to actions. The first is the HMIS architecture, and that is implement one HMIS for all 3 COCs, leveraging the API technology, and to RFP for a statewide HMIS. In our draft recommendations, we showed you another data system that is currently being operated as your data warehouse and how that would change. We did not do that in the final because we don't want to tell you it's only one option. You actually have lots of options, but what you need is data systems to talk instead of you entering data into 4 different data systems. We need that burden off our staff so we can actually end homelessness. So the next steps for this is really for you all to think this over and have a conversation. I know that the leadership from this COC and the leadership from Balance of State are also talking. We talked with Balance of State 2 weeks ago. We're talking with Pima County tomorrow and delivering the same presentation. And we really think you can, as a community, decide whether this is the right way to go. And if it is, we can, you can work together to make that work. You'll see here in red, I do need to note that Pima County is entering something called the Housing Command Central Intensive Technical Assistance, which means Pima County, when I do this session tomorrow, I'm going to say to them, you can't deal with this right now. You have to deal with Housing Command Central, and then come along and see where see where Maricopa and see where Balance of State are in this conversation. They are very supportive of this idea of merging our efforts into one, but they are going to be preoccupied with other things. Dependent on the cost is also going to depend on what you do with the vendor. As I said, in our draft recommendations, we looked at the vendor that operates your data warehouse, and the way in which their fee structure and the way their costs are very different from your current vendor. That is in the draft recommendations. It's not in the final recommendations because we wanted to give you you should find a new data system and not spell it out for you, but they are there. So I wanted to just make sure you all heard that. And last but not least, if you decide to go together, next slide, we need to have the governance structure around it to keep it successful. So that would be implementing a shared governance model that maximizes the HMS leadership of all 3 COCs. So that's, excuse me, ADOH and their proxy Solari. For you, that's Solari. And for Pima, that's Pima County, all working together as basically one giant state HMIS lead that is working for each COC, but also not duplicating effort. They're working on the same thing together. There's really no cost to this. It's just a lot more effort. And we do see that the progress that was made with the Dwell leadership really led us to this one. Like I think you can do this. If you had asked me 10 years ago, I said, I don't think you can do this, but now I believe you can. Again, down here, Pima County, again, very supportive of this idea, but they're not going to be in a position to be part of it for a little bit. Depending on how long the Housing Command Central Intensive Technical Assistance lasts, it's probably likely to last 6 to 9 months. So we might be a little bit delayed there on the timeline. There are recommendations and call to actions for each recommendation. I'm not sharing them with you today because I knew we had a very tight, I've been to many COC meetings. I know they're very tight agendas. So I wanted to make as quick as possible, give you the high level stuff. The other things that need to happen are kind of all part of this package as well. So I think that's the last slide. Cleo, I am correct. So very different, not very different, just more vague recommendations than our draft recommendations, but it's the same thing. You need a data system that meets your current needs and not one that just makes you compliant with HUD. And that is basically the crux of it. So that's it for me. Katie, questions, comments? I'm here.
No, we're getting towards time. Thank you, Chris, for being here. As far as this is on your agenda for information and discussion only, so I'm not asking you to vote. We're changing our HMIS right now. We are in discussions, as Chris mentioned, with Balance Estate and Tucson TPCH to see kind of where they're at, and we'll have kind of greater recommendations to bring to you all in January to have do you want to vote on a joint RFP? Do you want to vote on a single RFP? Kind of where would you like to go next after this? But want to pause, see if you all have any questions. You will also get the full evaluation report sent out to you this afternoon. Chris sent it to us late last week. And as much as I knew you wanted to read it on Thanksgiving, I did not send it out to you to read on Thanksgiving.
I have a question. So the HMIS system, I mean, is it the sense that it doesn't work, or it just needs to be improved? And
I see Chris nodding his head. So
yeah, so I would say that it works. It does what it needs to do to meet HUD compliance most of the time. There have been a few times around October the 1st where the data standards aren't ready right on time, but that happens from time to time. It's more that what HMIS was designed for in 2004 isn't what you need as a community in 2023. And that's what it's really about, is having the flexibility. So when we talk about the API technology, that would allow you at an organization to use a different data system and just upload. It also could mean that other organizations that don't have data systems that meet that enter data indirectly. So it gives you a lot of flexibility as far as where the data comes from. But it's more about just getting it in there with the least amount of effort possible instead of all this duplication of effort over and over again. Does that answer the question you had?
Chris, can I also add, Solari as our administrator does a lot of things outside of HMIS to make it what it is. So like our by name list that is generated every week is not generated in HMIS. It's generated outside in their business intelligence team. And so we've had to make a lot of time sensitive adjustments that are staff heavy to be able to overcome the challenges within our vendor selection of WellSky as our vendor. So some of these recommendations really come from like, yes, all of those workarounds have been developed and they're working, but even like the coordinated entry tool that's getting developed, that is staff time spending to develop all of those questions and things inside of WellSky and make it accessible for folks.
Yeah, and that really led us to one of our biggest recommendations, which was finding a more flexible HMIS environment, because taking your data outside of HMIS and putting it in Tableau or other places, that puts you at risk. We were able to find PII in some of those. I don't believe it was a Maricopa. I think it was a Balance Estate by name list, but it doesn't matter. You could technically, if you were very skilled, still maybe find stuff. It's better if it's within a protected environment than making all these data systems outside and patching them on top of HMIS. That's really what we've been doing for the last 10 years. And our recommendation is to stop doing that and find something that can do everything within the environment itself.
Thank you, Chris. Any other questions from the board or the members of the public? All right, more to come on this in the coming months. Agenda item number 8 is the Pathways Home update, but in the interest of time, I think we're going to send that update out to everyone. So we're going to go to agenda item number 9. I promise I'm not doing this just so I can do my presentation, but I'm going to be brief and I'm going to give an update on our the City of Phoenix humans. It says Charter 100 luncheon. It should not. That is my fault. It's a presentation I gave last week or 2 weeks ago. Sorry. Next slide, please. So talk a little bit about the efforts that the city and many partners had around the Human Services campus. The affected area is roughly 7th Avenue to 15th Avenue, Jefferson to the north, and the railroad tracks or Harrison Street to the south. And over the last year, as many as 700 to 1,000 individuals called that area home and were camping or living in that area. So our office, in an attempt to address every single one of the individuals in that area as we were closing the area to camping. We did it in the most caring and compassionate way that we could, while also being compliant with superior and federal court orders. Next slide, please. So the approach that we took, we called it a block by block approach. So instead of looking at the entire encampment and roughly 15 block area as one encampment, we looked at every block as an individual encampment. Our outreach teams provided notice to an affected block, usually 2 weeks towards the end of our efforts. We weren't able to provide that much notice, but usually 2 weeks notice that a particular block was going to be closed to camping. We'd get to know everyone on that block. Of course, people came and went, but as best we could, place people ahead of the day when the block was closed to camping, if they were willing and wanted to be placed someplace. But on those days that we designated as our engagement efforts, we did close the block. We got a permit to close the block to vehicular traffic. And we, together with many partners, CBI and Human Services Campus, specifically outreach partners, really worked with every single individual on those blocks. We committed at the very beginning of this effort that we were going to offer indoor shelter to anyone and everyone who we engaged, and we were able to make that a reality. We also were able to store property for people either who were going into an indoor location and weren't able to bring all of that property with them, or if they were not present on site and we came across someone's property, we stored that as well. So again, and that's a sample of the sign that was put up after the block was closed to camping. Next slide, please. So altogether, there were 15 blocks that we closed to camping, beginning in May 10th, 2023 was the first day that we closed a block to camping. On those days, those efforts we called them our engagement days, but really the days that we closed the block to vehicular traffic and officially closed the block to camping, we engaged with 718 individuals. 590 or 82% accepted our indoor shelter services. 128 are just under 20% did not accept those indoor shelter locations. Next slide, please. So just a quick before and after of one of the blocks that was close to camping. I believe this is Madison, in between 8th and 9th, facing the Maricopa County lots out there. Next slide, please. And this is really how we did it. And not only did we utilize the shelter service system, the current available shelter service system, but we also brought on 482 temporary shelter or temporary lodging, as we call them, in the last year, all of which, except really the last one on this list, our iHelp program, all of which were really dedicated to this effort. So all of these, again, are temporary. A lot of them are utilizing hotels or motels and then temporarily increasing capacity at our Washington shelter, while we have 790 permanent shelter beds at various stages of construction right now. Next slide. And then, of course, we opened, to assist in this effort, we opened the Safe Outdoor Space. It opened November 1st. Next slide. And quickly, our Safe Outdoor Space, which is located at 15th Avenue in Jackson, is a voluntary safe place for those roughly 20% of individuals who did not accept our offer of indoor shelter. Everyone at the site is assigned a sleeping area. We provide them with a tent. We have restrooms, showers, and we'll have laundry eventually. We've got 24-hour a day staffing in partnership with the Human Services Campus and Community Bridges, and as well as the City of Phoenix team. We've got private security, and we're pairing it with all kinds of services. The goal of the Safe Outdoor Space is to get people into a safer indoor space and end their homelessness eventually. So I think I've got one more slide. And that is just a very old, at this point, an old aerial view. It looks very different right now, although we still are under construction at the space. The orange that you'll see, that is the indoor space at the Safe Outdoor Space. So we've got offices on the left-hand side of that space, and then also a very, very large warehouse where we will be doing heat and cold respite, communal dining, case management services, and everything that is white, kind of around the orange box or orange rectangle. that's all the shade structure, which is why we really loved this space. So this huge metal shade structure under which all of the camping will take place. So all of the campsites will be under the shade structure. Right now, it is sort of over in the parking lot area while we complete construction, which is anticipated to be completed this month. We also have 2 of our X-Wings, which are converted shipping containers that make 40 units of non-congregate shelter on this site temporarily. And this site will be open for 3 years. And right now has 35 individuals camping on it. So as we slowly ramp up, as staffing allows, and as our construction efforts wrap up, we'll have a capacity of 300 individuals. However, we like to say that we obviously don't want it to get anywhere near there, as the whole goal again is to move people into safer indoor locations. And that's all for me. Any questions?
Rachel, I have a question.
Sure.
I mean, I think we all know the effort the city has gone through. Massive. Very candidly, you're to be commended. I think the question I have is all of this emergency response, what is the ramifications of the city's budget moving forward and all these people in these various sites? What is the thought process 6 months, a year from now?
Great question. So all of the temporary locations, again, we've sort of timed it out that our temporary locations will end as our permanent locations are opening. So we've got 790 shelter beds in various different shelters that are in various stages of construction right now. So as things, temporary things close, we'll be bringing on new permanent things. But I think even more to your point, right now we were able to do this because of this huge surge in shelter. This is our opportunity to really help to make sure we've got amazing partners like A New Leaf and CBI and some of our other partners that really stepped up to help end folks' homelessness. We are very aware that providing temporary shelter did not end anyone's homelessness, but we need to now, they're in a safer place, certainly in an indoor location. And we've got to rely on our homeless service system to help now end those individuals' homelessness. And I will say as well, one thing that we are working on currently is sort of a little deeper dive as to who it was that we worked with out there, the 718 individuals we engaged with, as well as the 590 who went to shelter. Where are they now? Have any of them ended their homelessness? Are they still in shelter? Have they returned to homelessness? So that's what we're working on currently. Thank you. All right. Agenda item number 10 is a request for future agenda items. Do board members have any other action or discussion items for future meetings? If you think of any, let's send them to Katie. And then agenda item number 11 is our roundtable of announcements, events, challenges that you want to address or opportunities to come together for a new idea. Do any board members have any ideas or thoughts they wish to discuss at this time? Yes, sorry. Oh my goodness, we really took the whole time.
Rachel,
Very rare indeed.
Question that might be a little out of turn. I'm not a board member, so Katie, if I'm not doing this right with rules of the meeting, tell me at the end. Okay. I always goof that up. I'm assuming the word camping is very intentional. Can you talk through that a little bit?
Sure. Well, so our order was to our Superior Court order was to not allow camping in the area, as well as many other things. There were many facets of it. So there is no longer any camping in the area around the Human Services campus. We have posted signs. We have outreach proactively going out to make sure the last thing we want to do is have anyone get in, any sort of law enforcement activity because of it. So we're proactively going out. Our partners proactively go out, and then of course our PD are enforcing laws. They go and also they always will say, hey, this area is closed to camping if there is anyone either with a tent, with a structure, or without sleeping in the area. Thank you. All right, just one last thing. December 4th, next Monday, is our strategic planning session here at the MAG office. We will see everyone next Monday. If you don't have the invitation, please reach out to Katie and she will get it to you. And if there is no further